Welcome to the Choose to Be podcast. We are so excited for you to join us today as we welcome to the conversation Jeremy Leavitt. Jeremy is a marriage and family therapist based in Las Vegas who works with a lot of youth who struggle with compulsive behaviors. I know, Jeremy, that you work with all ages. Today, however, we're going to be focusing more on our children and how to navigate those situations where those of you who are working through betrayal from your partner's compulsive sexual behaviors, and let's say now you find out your child is struggling with similar behaviors, whether that's exploratory or compulsive, it really can send your system into trauma again or a trauma response. But their experience looks different from adults, right? And that's, Jeremy, what we're really excited to hear you talk more about and share your thoughts around. And again, it's really nice to meet you face to face. And like I said, your wife is super cool. So you must be cool too. Thank you for joining us today.
I hope so. Yeah. So I love working with everybody, but teens, adolescents, young adults are my favorite. And I really love that you're having this topic because that's something I see quite often, right? Where I'm working with the youth, the young adult or the adolescent. And I've got a mom in my office who may or may not have betrayal trauma of her own, right? But she at least comes from a different time, a different culture, a different reality than that teenager. And so it usually, whether there's betrayal trauma or not, there's a shock to the system, right? Because at least, my generation, I'm 41 now. We hadn't talked about sex as openly as hopefully as openly as we are now. And so
Or
if my mom were
healthfully.
to find out, or healthily, right? And so if something were to, come out when I was a teenager to my mom, I don't know how my mom would have responded, but I don't know if it would have been great. Much as I love my mom and how awesome she is, it's just a different culture. The thing that I can appreciate is that those that are working through and healing from and progressing through their own betrayal trauma have a unique set of challenges as they address this with their kids. But at the same time, they are also, depending on where they're at in their recovery, uniquely qualified, right, to assist and help their kids through this. And I say kids on purpose. It's not just the young men. I had 2 teenage girls in my office yesterday. So it's a cool opportunity too, at the same time. If the betrayal trauma is there and they've done their work and they've learned to manage and work through their stuff and working on that shame resiliency and all that stuff, that can actually be really helpful for their kids because there's a lot to teach their kids about that as well.
Okay, so I'm having this massive wave of all of these thoughts around my parenting. And
Yeah.
when I have an 18-year-old and how I responded to just sexual topics with him before I started on this journey to where I am now. Now, granted, I do have a lot of training and I've gone through my grad school and I've done this work professionally during this window too. But I just think about how much shame I carried in the beginning that I didn't even know I carried versus going through all of my work. So, on one hand, I'm listening to you and I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm so grateful for the tools I have. And I wish I could rewind and redo earlier years. Yeah, it's just
Well,
so
the cool
different.
thing is you are rewinding by parenting differently now and interacting with them differently now. You are rewinding. You are creating a new narrative. Like you are doing that. Like that makes sense to me. And there's healing from that too. It's not like they're, broken because of
I'll
that.
take that reframe, Jeremy. I'll take that. So, in the work you do, Jeremy,
Yeah.
are you still running groups with
Yeah.
teens? Are you do mainly individual? Just tell me a little bit about the work that you're doing.
I run one group a week of dedicated young men that want to really focus on their recovery, which I think group work is really, really important, whether it's in a formal group or just creating a support system. But, that's just a couple hours a week. And then the rest of it is all individual work. And I love the group, right? And I think it's super useful because they're basically doing the work themselves and I'm just there kind of directing it. I find individual a lot more rewarding because it's that more one-on-one personal relationship. As much as I love group, if I had to pick between the two, I would focus more heavily on that, which I am, and then I have group as an added benefit. But group is paramount. Like I encourage everybody, whether it's an addiction recovery 12-step type group or a formal group, everyone needs that, some level of that in their recovery. I always tell the guys I'm working with, and I don't have a young women's group, but if I had a young women's group, it would include the same information. The 4 pillars of their sobriety, of their recovery, maybe is a better word, right? Because recovery is way better than sobriety, is support, successes, accountability, and insight. And they need those 4 things. And they can get all 4 of those things really, really easily in a group, right? They get
Can you
4 in
say it
one.
again? And I love that you
Yeah.
said this, and I want people to really
Yeah.
let it
So
sink in.
the 4 pillars of recovery are success. Well, I can't remember what the first one. Why is my brain
Support.
blank?
Support.
Yeah, there we go. Support, successes, which is not sobriety, it's not abstinence. It's focusing on the successes outside of that as well. I just killed it on my English test. Because very often these kids get into this mindset of I suck because I can't get in control of this aspect of my life. And then they have amnesia to all the other awesome things.
Mm.
Right. So focusing on those successes as well. And then accountability and insight, just taking what they've learned and applying it as they learn about themselves and they learn about their emotional responses and triggers and their unresolved things. All those things are key to that recovery process for them.
Okay, I have a question. I didn't know, Amy, if you were
Yeah.
going to ask something, and I'm going to hijack, but I have this question that I'm so curious about. Are boys groups or youth groups, whether you're dealing with males or females, are they different than the groups that you would run if you were running a group for adults? Would they look different, or would you say those 4 pillars?
Yes. The 4 pillars are still going to be there, but I'm going to, I'll just, you'll get what I'm saying when I say this. A young, unmarried, so adolescent or young adult and unmarried group looks different in a few different ways. One, we're not really talking about the relational sexual aspect. We're not talking about betrayal trauma in the present. We're just talking about like, here's why you're doing this, right? But we're also a lot more irreverent. There's a lot more, we have to joke about it, right? And if a mom were to be in that group, she might be like, oh my gosh, what is my son doing here? But at that same level, there is a little bit of that irreverence. There is a little bit of that, what some might call crude humor, but the reality is we're talking about pornography and masturbation, right? And so there's going to be some jokes, but that's all intentional. That is to connect with the boys, to lighten the mood because it has such a heavy weight on them. It feels, I'm surrounded by these guys that love me, that I look up to. Even there's the star quarterback over there, and there's the awesome young man that I aspired to be over there. And we're all just not making light of in an inappropriate way, but having fun, joking a little bit, teasing each other a little bit. And I think that is another aspect that would be different. That is different. I've ran men's groups before. That is different. It's a little bit more fun. I guess is how you put it.
Well,
Because it works. It works for them.
well, yeah, that makes sense when you're dealing with a human brain that isn't fully developed yet. And
I turn into a teenager during those groups. Yep.
right. So you're dealing with that. And I would imagine too, that really helps release a lot of that shame.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They need it. They need to hear it. They need to joke about it. They need to make light of it because they're not able to do that anywhere else.
Right.
And it's a safer environment to do it as well, right? Like they're not worried about judgment. They're not worried about mom saying, what did you just say? Like, it's just, they're all thinking it. They're just not, they're controlled at when they say it.
I wonder, do you see these boys come in with that heaviness of shame and that oh my gosh, I'm going to have this for life. And a lot of, at least the youth I've worked with, have been culturalized. A lot of them come from pretty conservative religious backgrounds. And so
Yes,
they have
absolutely.
this of like, I'm gross, I'm dirty, or I'm bad. And then it's like, it's the plague. And so they have this really long term thought of this is now me and this is my life. And so, how do you tackle that piece? This obviously is part of it, but how do you help them unravel all of that?
Yeah, so that's really common. Sometimes it takes a little bit of one-on-one work before I can even get them into group because there is so much shape. What if I see somebody I know? Or very often they'll come in a group and I'll hear things like, this is something that I have to struggle with the rest of my life. And I normalize that for them because, to be honest, what every man, I would go even further, say every human being, unless they're completely broken up here, which I hate to say that, but you get what I mean, should struggle with pornography, right? It's not that every man on this earth is out looking at inappropriate images, but the way our brain's wired, if I was to flash 1,000 images on my back wall back here for 1 second, and all of them were great except for one. One was pornographic. That's the only one my brain would see. That's how my brain is wired, right? And so it's normalized. I'm like, yeah, like you have a brain wired towards sexuality. It's a really beautiful thing, actually, normalizing that for them. But you're right. It very often gets into that very dirty feeling, nitty gritty. I'm a bad person. I don't like the word addict because a lot of these guys I'm working with actually don't qualify for that term. Some do, but a lot don't. And so there's that cultural aspect of I am, I like that you would use the word the plague, right? I have the plague and people aren't going to want to be around me and people aren't going to want to date me and I'm not going to ever get married. And I hear it all. I'm working with one guy in group right now that's working towards a mission and he's convinced he's never going to be able to go. Right. Because unfortunately, he's had some pretty church leadership in the past, but at the same time, that cultural part of it is a problem. But the other part of it is his parents, unfortunately. When his parents found out about it, they told him, "Oh my gosh, you're never going to be able to go on a mission." Right. And that just breaks my heart. Right.
And
And every time he slips up, it's still like parents are so old school and I can't get the parents in my office because he's an adult and they don't want to come. But it's like every time he messes up and he reports to them, which I've stopped him from being accountable to them, but it would be like, "D- you're never going to get married. What girl would ever want to date you?"
that
And
all of that breaks my heart so much. And even I'm thinking about women who are listening to this. When you say some of these things, my guess is there's going to be some reactions of like, because there is this fear that shows up for these women of I have to protect my son from going down the same path as his dad, or I have to stop this. And so a lot of times I'll see those fear tactics being used of like, I have to put the fear of God in them because if I don't, then this will happen.
But we know fear is such a truddy motivator. I hate, the three motivators. I want a reward, I'm afraid of a consequence, or I'm converted to the idea and I love it. Right. And the fear works. It's just really short term and it does way more damage than good. And I'm feeling for you, moms. Like, I get it. You don't want somebody to go through the same thing you've gone through at the least. At the most, you don't want your son or daughter hurting.
Right.
Right. And I get that. And I understand that. And I know that I've done it too. We've all messed up our kids a little bit, right? We all have those moments, right? But I always tell when I go out and I speak or I go out and I talk to groups, one thing I always make sure to say, so I'll make sure I say it here, is that I don't have any daughters. I have two sons, right? But if I had daughters, I would want them dating some of the young men that I'm working with, right? Or some of the in my group, because if I was to take a spiritual construct here for a minute, those men that I'm working with are uniquely qualified to date my daughter because they understand recovery, they understand accountability, they understand honesty, they're authentic with themselves. And then from the spiritual standpoint, right? everyone else they're dating is pretending like they don't have a problem
Right.
and their heads in the sand. These men are uniquely qualified to date my daughter.
Right. Well, it's the emotional intelligence piece. I tell
Absolutely.
women all the time, it really isn't a porn problem. It's an emotional problem
Mhm.
that they're using this or anything else to numb out or avoid. And so when
Yeah.
you're looking for that healthy relationship, if these young men and young women who are struggling with a compulsivity in anything but pornography, and they learn how to actually, like you said, be authentic and feel their emotions, they're going to be able to connect and have that emotional intimacy. And that's
Yeah.
really such a piece that's missing in so many relationships.
Absolutely. And that's foundational too, right? If that's how the relationship starts, even if maybe porn slips in at some point or I don't like the word relapse if it's just a one of, right? And he pulls himself back together and he's right back on track. Like, I think that's a success, to be completely honest. They've got that foundational piece to really build and grow and create even more intimacy as they move forward, right? So these young men that are honest now and working on it now are going to make great husbands one day. They really are, because they can talk about even just the language of emotion is missing from a lot of relationships.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I love that you just said that.
I struggle with it too. So
Well, we all do. And I think we mentioned this in a more recent episode, Alana, but this is this really is a human issue. Like all of us as humans are learning to feel our feelings and have that emotional intelligence. And so I love the idea of young adults, teens, those whose brains are still developing, learning these skills and these tools. And I know you said this already. I really want to add my thoughts to the gratitude that I have for being able to go through what I did and showing up for. I have 2 daughters and 2 boys. And so kind of like Alana, what you were saying, yeah, part of me wishes I could go back and redo. But as I even show up today for my daughters in such a different way because of my experience and lessening that shame and fostering more of that emotional connection with them is really a beautiful experience. Anyways, it's such a great conversation. I love this. What would you say to, let's just speak to moms who have been betrayed by their partner and now they find out that their child is struggling with these compulsive behaviors and they feel all of the emotions and perhaps even foreshadowing, like we talked about, oh my gosh, this is the road to end up down. What would be the first thing you would suggest them doing when they find out?
yeah. So it's really cool actually, because I get the opportunity to do that with lots of women because I do work with betrayal trauma with moms. And then, as you can imagine, very often that comes out at some point, and I end up working with the son as well. When that pops up, it comes to light. The very first thing, if they're not working with me, I'm like, you need to go talk to somebody before you react, right? You're not solving the problem today, right? You're not, nothing needs to happen today. I get you want to go in, you want to fix, but I want you to talk. I want you to know how you feel about things. I want you to almost like, if they're working with me, we're creating a plan together about responses, about how to handle it, but really slowing down that process and helping mom understand that couple things. One, he's not your husband, even though he might look like you. And he might even act like him a little bit, but he's not, because your husband, in many cases, not in all cases, didn't start working on this young. Maybe they did, but generally not, in my experience. Okay. Two, helping mom understand that her response right now, I don't want to say makes or breaks recovery, but propels or slows down recovery. Because if we can focus on the connection and the empathy, that's the healing that's going to help your son move forward. If you can create that dialogue and that emotional intimacy with your son and let him know that you are there for him and you're going to support him and you're going to help him figure this out, like just conveying that trust. Trust is really important. I know he doesn't have it, but letting him know You trust that he'll figure this out. He's capable. Those are some of the first things I make sure mom knows. Now, sometimes mom does not need to be that person too. Mom, sometimes it's okay to be like, this is not mine. And if dad's involved, pass the buck to dad. And depending where dad is in recovery, where you're at in your relationship with dad or your husband, sometimes it's okay to be like, my role is complete support and encouragement, but I'm not going to be the one managing the computer. I'm not going to be, because I don't want it to turn into that either. Where I know sometimes early in recovery in betrayal trauma, we're trying to police and we're trying to do this. And, like I have a friend who told me once her husband was a pill addict and she was in the car at 3 a.m. because she had a trigger with a flashlight looking in the car for pills, right? Like we want to avoid that behavior too. So sometimes it's okay to pass that on to your support system and his other supporters. But really, when it comes down to it, just focusing on the relationship, not trying to fix the problem right away. I guess if I can simplify that, because I could keep talking.
I want to highlight what you just said there. You said telling him you trust him and believe, or her, them,
Yeah,
telling
absolutely.
him that you trust them and believe they're capable to figure this out. And what a contrast with that message of you're broken and you're going to have this forever if you don't figure this out right now. Like those two messages, I just want to like let those sit side by side because sometimes you have to dig really deep to be able to find that trust and just to remember that they are capable and they can figure this out and they have more resources and support than they ever did before. And I'll add to what you said, Jeremy, is if you are a parent who's listening to this podcast right now, they have a parent who's getting educated and who's
Absolutely.
learning, which a lot of my clients have never had. So
Absolutely.
I really love that you said that.
It really is like I know it's hard when we are in that heightened emotional state. It's hard to believe those things or even think those things sometimes. But when we slow down and we're logical, I trust my kids that they will figure it out. Right. Even on something completely unrelated, I see it all the time. We have this anxiety about our kids. I had a mom in my office, my daughter's going into the senior year and she doesn't know what she wants to be and this and this. I'm like, you know what? My favorite answer to what you want to be when you grow up, even in college, my favorite answer is I don't know. Trust them that they'll figure it out. I could take your daughter or your son and go put them in any other country in the world right now and any other city in the world that doesn't speak our language and just leave them there. And they're going to figure it out. It's going to be rough for a little while, but they will figure it out. So we just have to start trusting them. They're capable.
I actually just heard Brene Brown, probably TikTok, I'm sure, but she was talking about how she told her kids when they graduated high school, she said, if you already know what you want to do for your career, I'm not paying for college. But it, because she wanted to encourage them to take all the classes and figure it out and explore all of the options, and she will pay for the
Yes.
exploration. So
Yes.
that's what came to mind as you were talking, and I love that so much. It really is. Well, here's my coach brain is going like, when you think those thoughts about your children, you're capable. I trust that you will trust yourself. I believe in you. And I've actually been practicing saying those words. I believe you and I trust that you'll figure it out. And what that does, not only for my children, but for me, how it shifts the energy in me. And then I actually show up differently. I respond or not respond differently. And I have to consciously choose that. But when you practice it over and over, I've noticed it shifts my system. And so if something does happen or come up, because I practice that, I'm not reacting so immediately. I don't have to so hard to like slow it down. And anyways, that's what.
Well, and there's an implied step there, and I think we all know it, but we should say it is we can't do that if we're still swimming in our own shame, right? If I'm a horrible mom or this is my fault or all these things are still there, we're not going to be able to do that, right?
Right. Which, hold on, and I say this almost, I think every episode, why it's so important to do your own work.
Both of our mouths opened at the exact same time to literally say the same sentence. So
Yeah.
important to do your own work.
Well, and I'll give you an example of what that might look like from, because I always love taking it out of the context of pornography so people can maybe understand it even a little better. When I, as a dad, maybe act like a fool, I'm getting angry, my voice is raised, I'm reacting to something my kids did. And maybe they're not doing what I asked them to do. Okay. It's not, my reaction isn't about my kid, it's about me. And what I mean by that is it's that I am afraid that I can't handle them not doing the thing that I'm asking them to do. It's not that they're not doing it. It's that it's my stuff, right? That I'm not going to know what to do with that. So I need to manage that situation so that I don't have to be in that space where I have no answers.
I think you just blew a bunch of people's brains who have not done this work or who have not done coaching. What you just said there, I almost want you to like say it again. And you don't have to say it again, but rewind it if you need to, because this concept that you're talking about, when we haven't learned it yet, the first time you hear it, it's like, no, 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 no. That's not how it works. It's because they're not doing A, B, or C. And yeah, it
Nope.
just
It's because you can't handle that they might not do A, B, or C.
bingo.
You're not trusting them.
Well,
Almost
I know, right? Well, I'll
the
just,
silence.
for me, I know that at one point, like I had in my head how I wanted their life to go. And I wanted their life to be better than mine or better than their dad's. And I had this idea for them. And so at any point they made a decision or a behavior that threatens that manual that I had written while they were still in utero, or how I wanted their life to go, it was a threat to the manual script that I had. And so I had to just tear that up. And really, the truth is, I don't write it. I never have and I never will. They write it, and they write it through these experiences that they're having. And if they can feel that sense of safety with me, that they can write parts of their manual and then rip it up and write again. And I'm not going to leave, and I'm not going to not love, and I'm not going to not be there. What a beautiful gift you're giving your children. And I don't want to come across like I'm doing this perfectly, because there is no such thing. It's just, I was literally talking to Alana this morning going, I have to remind myself of all of these things because I'm practicing them really hard right now.
I love that. I'm practicing. There's one thing I want to hit on before we wrap up, and it's right along with what you're saying. Because you said they are writing it through the experiences they are having. And with pornography specifically, part of our growing up is becoming a sexual being. We've always been a sexual being, but we're stepping more into that sexuality.
Absolutely.
And so part of this journey really is for them to learn how to have healthy sexuality. And healthy sexuality is not shutting down sexuality. The hyperactive sexuality versus the anorexic sexuality is the same coin. It's just two sides of the same coin.
Mhm.
So this journey of them learning and figuring out and loving and honoring and owning and embracing their sexuality is a very normal and healthy part of becoming an adult. And so I would love, and it's funny because my brain's like, Alana, you're going to step in mucky water. Be careful. But I think a lot of my clients have never learned or been taught at all what healthy sexuality looks like. They've never experienced it in their own marriages or within themselves. And so navigating that with their child, that can be really complex and unknown of how to do that.
And scary
It's
because,
scary, very scary.
that anxiety of it, maybe you recognize it or not, but I might not have the best ideas or training or understanding of what healthy sexuality is, but I still have to teach my kid, because if I don't, then the world is. And we all know what pornography teaches about that. right? Or not even straight pornography, what the cultural parts of society teach about that.
Right.
And so you're 100% right. Like I always tell people I'm very pro sex in my office. I'm just anti porn. And I think you have to be anti porn to be really pro healthy sexuality. I've had multiple couples in my office that include porn in their relationship. And I've never had once, not once in almost 12 years, where I had the woman alone say she was okay with it. And so there's this idea that even though she pretended like she was, right? So there's the idea that creating and learning and communicating, I think creating part of that healthy sexuality is we've hit on it a little bit, is really creating that emotional intelligence so we can communicate needs, we can communicate desires, we can communicate fears, right? Because if I have a partner that I'm connected to that's willing to do this with me, I can have all of those conversations, right, in a safe and productive way that allows me to explore that sex, because we're exploring it before we start in having a sexual relationship. But once we start having that sexual relationship, we have to continue that growth into healthy sexuality. And we don't get that without that connected emotional intelligence piece. And that's what you as parents could be doing right now, is helping them explore some of that, getting curious with them about some of the things that are happening, how they're feeling about things. One of my favorite questions to ask a teenager, and parents take this, please use it. It's going to be real awkward, I promise, but do it anyway. Ask your teenager what they think a healthy sexual relationship looks like.
Mm.
Why not just straight up ask them? And I don't know, it's still a good answer, because then there's a teaching moment, right? And I think that's a really great question to maybe start a conversation about it, right? Break the ice and just start talking about, what do you think a healthy sexual relationship looks like? Do you have any questions about what a healthy sexual relationship looks like? Really get into the nitty gritty with them, because you guys are completely right. You are part of their lives right now where it's really important for them to start exploring these ideas and these concepts, because you're right. The other side of the coin is they get into a relationship with maybe with another person that has no knowledge or understanding or learning about this concept. And I guess there's a beautiful thing about learning that together and running around like a chicken with their heads cut off and figuring that out. And that can be really good too. But more often than not, it leads to unfulfilled sexual relationships and unconnected sex and betrayal, whether there's pornography or not. And it does not usually work very well.
Well, I love that, and it just reinforces the intimacy pyramid of all
Yeah.
of those levels of intimacy, including the sexual intimacy, but having that foundation. And it goes back to what we talked about earlier of just that building greater emotional awareness. As we wrap up, Jeremy, thank you for coming. What final thoughts? Anything that you would want to just leave with us?
Yeah. So if I'm going to speak directly to the moms, because that's the audience, right? Love, if you can, I know some of you have learned to love your recovery. I know a lot of you have not yet, right? But learn to love the growth process for yourself, and think about all the things you've learned and how awesome it is that your son or daughter gets the opportunity to start this journey at a maybe earlier age than you or your husband or family members have, right? Err on the side of gracious and charitable thinking, right? Like, if you have that lens and you can slow yourself down and recognize and see your son or your daughter and for who you know they are, right? And trust them and encourage them and love them and support them through this, you are creating somebody, and well, you are helping create somebody. You're helping create an environment where this person can grow, and they're going to be heads above their peer group when it comes time to start getting into serious relationships. And so this is a real, like, if you think about it this way, it's just as much as it sucks and you don't want your kid hurting, and maybe it's even hurting you a little bit, right? As a mom going through this, if you can see it through the view or the vision or the lens of this is an awesome opportunity. Let me utilize this. Let me learn. Let me grow. Let me use my resources because I know even me as a therapist, I'm not perfect at it. So let me talk to my people. Let me include my support group. Let me include my therapist. Let me include my friends, my what Brene Brown calls them the hide the body friends. Right. Let me include these people and talk and get good with it so that I can help create this awesome individual.
I love that. I'm cheering you on. And I'm cheering on each of you listeners as you're sitting here trying to learn and grow and do your work. Give yourself credit for that good, important things that you're doing right now in the second you're doing it. So, thank you, Jeremy, for hanging out with us today. Thank you to all of our listeners for being with us today. And as always, we look forward to seeing you all next week.